welcome back to Words and Pictures for a few minutes of fun. Don't worry, you're not experiencing deja vu. If you watched the Watercolour Wednesday episode this week, you will have seen these bits of playing with Take 3 colours suggested by El Buchtel. And yeah, those are what we played with, and I was left with some watercolour doodles that I thought it would be nice to add some detail to. And then I thought it would be only fair to maybe invite you along for adding that detail. So for this, I'm definitely going to zoom in. I don't know how much more paint I'm going to add, maybe to this landscape some more paint. But I'm thinking I'll start with some pen work on these flowers. I've got my trusty dip pen here. I've got the Bleedproof white ink. I've also got a brown Pigma Micron pen, quite a fine one, 05, that is brown, I believe, yes. And then I've got a couple of the Fuumuui brushes. I've got one of the Needlepoint brushes. Somewhere along the line, I've put down the finest of the Needlepoint brushes somewhere and I can't find it. So this is the next one up in that set of 6. This is the finest of the rounds, a 0 round, it's got good spring in its brush. I've also got my Silver Black Velvet Rigger or Script brush, which is a very fine brush and good for scribbling and things. We've used that in the past. As always, still, ever, you can get 20% off your Fuumuui order if you go there by using the code Alison with 1L. Let's zoom in and get going. As mentioned before, I bought these Fuumuui brushes myself. They're not free product. This is not promotional. This is me purely enjoying using Fuumuui. They approached me later to see if I would like to test one of their travel watercolour kits. You can have a look at that video if you're interested. But yes, the discount code they were kind enough to offer me for all of you. So this is the Bleedproof white ink. You could do this with acrylic paint. You could do this with a pen if you prefer. But I think I'm going to start with a bit of brushwork because I think that's quite a nice way to kick off. And I'm just going to kind of create some soft, stameny sort of centres to these flowers. I hope you can see that straight away that gives a sort of a focus and a bit of detail, allowing the eye to interpret what's going on the page in a slightly different way. So that's always a nice starting point, and it just helps me with a sense of light and a sense of what's where. So that was the fine Fuumuui round. Absolutely excellent. I'm still exploring with these brushes. That's why I'm sort of giving you feedback on how I use them or how they're working, because they're still kind of new to me. This is the dip pen. I'm creating a slightly more fluid version of the ink there, just so A, it'll flow off the pen, and B, so it'll give me a slightly less opaque look. And with that, I'm going to do just a little bit of flicking outwards through these petals, creating a bit of seaming, as in S-E-A-M, a seam like on a skirt, just through some of these petals, just to allow, again, a little bit of the eye to begin to interpret things. So one can create a little bit of extra edging, a little bit of extra frilling around the edges of some of these petals, just drawing in some extra little details. I'm going to come in from this one as well. So it's sort of accentuating little bits of detailing that may have been there when I created the petal stroke, but I can now give it a lot more detail by just allowing this white pen to shape things and just, yeah, create highlights. This is working on the Khadi paper. The details, all the details of this are in Wednesday's description, so take a look there. I'll list again at the bottom of here because I like to try and give you as much information as I can about what's going on. That's all quite nice. Just create a little bit of extra detailing in there. Pull down a couple of little fragments to create a space in that petal there. A little bit more So you can see by doing this, I'm creating slightly jagged edges on the petals, which I like. The brush strokes might have been a bit strong, and it's just letting me create a bit more definition within those. You could absolutely do this with a dark pen. I tend to like the white because I feel like it gives me a sense of light going on. Just adding, defining areas, individual little lines within a flower. I can of course use the pen to create finer little stamens as well. So both the nib of the pen and the more fluid ink allows me to create that as a more fluid, a finer little stamen amidst the stamens. I'm just pulling some sort of, going to define a petal here and a petal here. And sometimes I have to shut up because what I want to do is commune with what's going on the paper. So this one was a whole different shaped flower head, so I'm just gonna use that to create it. We could define a couple of petals down here, maybe something there, something here. And again, as so often, I'm going to find myself saying, it's about looking. It's about looking at what you've got on the page and making a determination, a decision about what you want to accentuate, what you want to sort of draw attention to, or what you might like to have fall into the background. So this one, shadowy one down here, I sort of feel like that is a place where I might want a bit more paint in here, just a slightly darker touch of shadow in there, just to create a bit more delight. A couple more strokes maybe over here, break up that petal just a little bit. That's sort of enough, I think, really, because the other thing you don't want to do is do too much and then the eye gets sort of confused. Oh, that's rather nice with that white ink just mixing in with that blue. Suggestion is better than trying to add full details. So let me lift those up so that you can have a look now. And do go back and have a look at these in their pre-pen mark stage in the previous video if you haven't seen them, because I think that gives you an idea of how much difference just a couple of strokes of the pen can make. If you want to, just come in and add that extra little bit of dark. So this is just the fine pen now, just creating some extra shadow right in the center of some of these. That's over the wet paint, that's not such a good idea. Yeah, so I now need to clean that on a separate bit of paper. There we go, nib is back now. Just a little scribble somewhere else usually does the trick. So that's just creating an extra bit of depth in each of those flowers by really pulling the darks together in the middle. That contrast is the thing that can help tell a story to the brain and the eye. Oh, I've ended up back in the wet paint, look. I'll lift it up again in a second. I've got to clean that nib again. And we're back. So it's I'm just scribbling on a piece of paper just off the side there. And if you want to, as I say, you can shape some of these petals with the dark. But I don't think I really want to do that. I think I'm enjoying those as they are. Beautiful little clusters of flowers. Grand. So this landscape, very, very loosely sketched in to start with, just with those soft watercolour doodles. Let's wipe this up so we don't put our pen down in it. So again, I did mention at the time that I could come back in and add a bit of detailing. So I think this will be with paint. Here's our brown mixed up between ultramarine blue and burnt sienna light. So I'm just going to allow that to sketch in some very fine tree trunks. Just it, again, an impression of the detail is better than trying to do it in full. Let the eye do some of the work. I'm going to come in with some of this pinky blue, I think, just to add a little more detail to these trees, which again were very soft over this side. It was very wet when I applied the paint, as opposed to over here where it was somewhat drier, and so I was able to create more detail immediately. So on these, what I might want to do is create a bit more softness and shadow underneath. Looking at these, I definitely want to soften those trunks that I've just put in, maybe with a bit more deep shadow underneath. So I'm picking up darker colours. The purple was good, wasn't it? I seem to remember. That purple gave us a nice sense of shading. Remember, watercolour will always dry paler than you've applied it. So although that might be looking a little bit full on at the moment, it will soften as it dries. But also remember, you can just go in with a bit of kitchen towel and lift it. I'm thinking in the foreground here I might try doing just a little bit of flicking, just to create the sense of movement and grasses down in the foregrounds. So this is again the Fuumuui round, and I'm barely making contact with the paper. I'm just letting what hits hit, and then I can sort of decide on what I want to draw attention to later. I'm going to create a little bit of a ridge here, maybe a little bit of depth for them to grow out of here. I mentioned a village in the background. I don't know if I really want to go as far as village, but one could certainly have the sense of a clump of trees on the horizon line. They're going to be smaller than these trees. If I want them to be further away, they need to be smaller than the ones I've got on this horizon line. So just somewhere in the background there, one can feel that there are more trees. And again, darker colours will come into the foreground. So keeping these trees nice and light is going to be key again to fooling the eye into understanding that they're further away. Let's add a couple more darks in here, because that will bring those forward. And shadows tend to be towards the base of the trees. They tend to be lighter as they go up. More shadow maybe underneath, just creating that illusion of, and then just maybe some texture through here. Oh, that's what the rigger is great at. So the rigger, or script brush, is really good at just creating random texture, particularly if it's quite dry as you do it. It's a good idea to either dry it off somewhere or just have a spare piece of paper around, so that I can then just use that in a very rough kind of way to create textures in this foreground. And now that it's all separated, it'll also do, yeah, I don't know if you can see, instead of being all fine and in its center, it's kind of scabby now. It won't stay scabby. All I have to do is dip it in the water, and there we are, we're back to a fine point. But that's just giving us a little sense of texture in those foregrounds. I'm going to try and come in with some very fine little tree trunks back there. And I know what else will make me happy in the long run. I'm going to do a couple of, yeah. The other thing I love doing with a rigger is just that sort of downward movement. Again, it's creating texture, and then out of it you can do a bit of flicking, creating texture and sort of clumps of stuff going on in the foreground. Don't like that lump there, so I'm going to lift it away. Don't like that lump there so much, so I'm going to lift it away. That's nice. A little bit more depth of colour under this ridge here. But so this is really a sort of extension of the Take 3 colours, but just showing you how one can take those really soft watercolour doodles and take them onto fresh detail with just a little, you know, a few pen strokes here and there, a few brush strokes here and there. This is still very sort of prominent under here. I'm wondering whether a little bit of white highlighting might not make me happy again. So where's my ink? I've just found the lid. That's not a good sign. That means the ink bottle is somewhere lidless. So let's take a little bit more of that. I could use some on here as well. Look, little flecks of white in here will help me, or help the eye to read these as a lot more delicate. So if they've gone a bit bulky in places, oops, that's too much. That's a big blob of water. It will just help the eye to read those as slightly more delicate. So let's see what happens if I just come in and flick a few. It's still wet there. I'll give it a quick dry and be back. There we go. Hopefully that is now dry enough to play with. Just thinking, oh, grand. Too much. Get in there fast and you can deal with it. Okay, what happened there? What I wanted was some very fine little flickers of detail. Just something to do with the consistency of that ink at that point. Didn't work. There we go. That's more like it. So you can probably hear, anybody enjoys ASMR, you'll be hearing now that pen against the paper, just creating those additional strokes, creating highlights down here in the grasses. I could even go umbles, couldn't I? And I think what I want to do is create a little bit of light under the trees here as well, just again for contrast, just creating that sort of sense of maybe you can see through the trees into the distance rather than it being a solid batch of stuff. And then I'm literally just going to do some sort of scribbles of detail down under these trees, scribbles of detail down under these trees, just allowing the highlighting to create a bit of variation, light hitting some of these grasses. Stay loose, let things suggest themselves, but as you do know, I do like to do with a landscape. Just going to break up these trees a bit again because they ended up being very solid because of that very wet paper in the previous episode. That just allows them to be a bit softer and more delicate. What I do want to do is add a couple of birds flying overhead. Heading off into the distance. There we go. How's that? Just creating a little bit of extra interest and detail. That's not in focus. It doesn't understand the painting. Camera doesn't understand my painting. There we go. That's better. And there are those flowers with their pen details. Keep things simple. Learn as you go and enjoy the process. I hope you've enjoyed that little extra deep dive into creating more detail over those watercolour doodles we created last time. Give me a thumbs up if you have. If you're not subscribed, we would love to have your company on this creative journey. If you've got a suggestion for 3 more colours you'd like me to have a play with at some point in the future, do pop that in the comments. I will list the ingredients we've used today, but if you want watercolour details, then head to the Take 3 Colours episode, which I will also link below. Thanks so much for watching and happy crafting all.